In today's video, we'll explore 10 of the most brutal Viking weapons that rarely make it into Hollywood depictions. While swords steal the spotlight in popular culture, they were luxury items for the elite. Most Vikings wielded far more brutal and surprisingly ingenious weapons. These weapons weren't merely designed to kill, they were crafted to maximize damage while serving multiple purposes, reflecting a culture where resourcefulness was as valuable as raw strength. From farming tools repurposed for battle to armor-shattering inventions, these forgotten weapons reveal why Norse raiders struck fear across medieval Europe. Let's begin. While axes are certainly associated with Vikings, the specialized skegox, or bearded axe, remains less familiar to most. What makes this weapon distinctive is its asymmetrical blade with an elongated beard, or lower edge, that extends down and back toward the handle. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a lethal design innovation. The extended lower edge served multiple deadly purposes. It allowed warriors to hook an opponent's shield or weapon, pulling it down or away to create an opening for a lethal strike. This hooking capability made the bearded axe particularly effective at disarming opponents or dragging a shield aside just long enough to deliver a finishing blow with the upper edge of the blade. Archaeological findings show these axes were usually 15 to 20 inches in length, easily wielded with one hand while holding a shield in the other. The skegox's brutal effectiveness came from its versatility. It could deliver crushing blows through chainmail, hook limbs to topple opponents, and even serve as a utility tool when not in battle. Bearded axes found in grave sites often show signs of both combat damage and wear from everyday use, highlighting the Vikings' practical approach to their weapons. Mentioned prominently in Norse sagas, yet often overlooked in popular culture, the atgeir was a fearsome polearm that combined the reach of a spear with the cutting power of an axe. The weapon features a long wooden shaft, topped with a spear point, and one or more auxiliary blades or hooks extending from the sides. The Icelandic sagas speak of the atgeir with particular reverence. In Njal's saga, the character Gunnar of Hlíðarendi is described wielding his atgeir with such skill that it sang as it cut through the air, before cleaving both armor and flesh. The saga describes how no shield could withstand it when properly wielded. The atgeir proved devastating in formation fighting due to its extended reach, allowing warriors to strike from behind the shield wall. Its secondary blades could effectively hook enemy shields or inflict horrific slashing wounds. With a balanced design enabling quick recovery after thrusts, this versatile weapon excelled in both offensive charges and defensive stands. Unlike many weapons that required years of training, the atgeir's design made it relatively straightforward to use effectively with basic instruction, making it ideal for the Viking societal structure, where all free men were expected to fight when called upon. Perhaps the most ubiquitous yet underappreciated Viking weapon was the seax, a single-edged knife that blurred the line between tool and weapon. Every Viking, regardless of social status, would have carried a seax. These knives ranged from small utility blades about 5 inches long to formidable langseax versions, reaching up to 20 inches, effectively short swords. The seax's brutal efficiency came from its design. A thick, heavy back edge provided weight for crushing force, while the single sharp edge could be maintained at extreme sharpness. The blade typically featured a distinctive broken back design, with the spine angling down toward the point, creating an ideal stabbing geometry that could puncture even mail armor when driven with sufficient force. What made the seax particularly dangerous was its omnipresence and concealability. While swords would be set aside during peaceful meetings or in certain settings, the seax was considered a tool and thus remained on its owner's person at virtually all times. Norse graves consistently include seaxes alongside everyday items, revealing how integrated these weapons were into daily life. Historical accounts tell of Vikings using seaxes with devastating effect in close-quarter combat situations where larger weapons became unwieldy. The langseax represents the largest variant of the seax family, occupying a middle ground between knife and sword. With blades typically measuring between 12 to 20 inches, these weapons were substantial enough for serious combat, but more accessible than the expensive swords reserved for elites. Archaeological findings from Viking settlements and burial sites across Scandinavia and England show langseaxes were particularly common during the 9th and 10th centuries, coinciding with the height of Viking expansion. Unlike the standard seax, which curved downward at the tip, many langseaxes featured a more sword-like profile with a straighter spine ending in a clipped point. With a thick spine and single-edged blade, the langseax concentrated force precisely where needed, shearing through padded armor with terrifying effectiveness. Despite this power, warriors wielded it with surprising speed in tight quarters. The substantial tang, the portion of the blade extending into the handle, often ran the full length of the wooden or bone grip, ensuring these weapons could withstand the shock of blocking even the heaviest strikes. The langseax served as a status symbol for successful raiders and freemen who couldn't afford swords but had progressed beyond basic weapons. Many examples feature simple but distinctive pattern welding in the blade and decorative elements on the handle, showing they were valued possessions rather than mere tools. The krokspjord represents one of the more specialized weapons in the Viking arsenal. This hooked spear featured a standard spearhead with the addition of one or more backward-facing hooks forged into the blade, or socket. While less common than standard spears, sagas and archaeological findings confirm these weapons saw use, particularly among warriors who specialized in anti-cavalry tactics or shield wall combat. The practical brutality of the krokspjord becomes evident when considering its function. Once the weapon penetrated flesh, the hook made extraction exceedingly difficult and traumatic. Pulling away from a standard spear might allow an injured opponent to retreat. The krokspjord ensured that withdrawal would cause catastrophic additional damage, as the hook tore through tissue. Beyond inflicting horrific wounds, the krokspjord excelled at a key Viking combat tactic: shield manipulation. The hook could catch the rim of an enemy's shield, allowing the wielder to pull it down or aside, creating an opening for allies to exploit. In the densely packed shield walls where much of Viking combat occurred, creating even momentary vulnerabilities often proved decisive. The sagas describe the krokspjord as a weapon that caused particular fear among opponents, not just for its physical damage, but for the psychological impact. The prospect of being caught by such a weapon added another dimension of terror to facing Viking raiders. The kestja represents another polearm from the Viking arsenal, similar to, but distinct from the atgeir. Norse sagas describe it as a heavy thrusting and cutting weapon with a substantial blade. Based on literary descriptions and limited archaeological evidence, the kestja appears to have been a versatile polearm with a longer and heavier blade than standard spears. What separated the kestja from other polearms was its substantial heft. Contemporary accounts suggest it required significant strength to wield effectively, but rewarded that strength with devastating impact. The substantial blade could deliver powerful chopping blows capable of shearing through shields, while the point maintained the thrusting capability essential for formation fighting. The sagas frequently mention the kestja in the hands of elite warriors and chieftains. In Egil's saga, the weapon features prominently in several key battles. Particularly brutal was the kestja's effectiveness against cavalry. The substantial blade could injure or kill horses while keeping riders at a distance, making it a specialized weapon for confronting mounted opponents, a tactical consideration that became increasingly important as Vikings expanded into territories where they might face armored horsemen. While the seax has received more historical attention, the humble knifer represented the most ubiquitous cutting implement in Viking society. smaller than the sayax and typically measuring 3 to 5 inches in blade length, the nifa was carried by virtually everyone, men, women, and even children, as an essential everyday tool. What made the nifa relevant as a weapon was its omnipresence and utility. These knives were razor sharp from constant maintenance, as they served for everything from food preparation to wood carving. When violence erupted unexpectedly, the nifa was always at hand, ready to be drawn from a belt sheath or neck lanyard. Archaeological evidence shows these knives were often carried in pairs or even sets of 3, each sized and shaped for different tasks. Many graves of both warriors and civilians contain multiple nifa, suggesting their importance transcended simple utility. The smaller size made them particularly effective for precise strikes to vulnerable areas, exactly the sort of opportunistic attack that might occur in close quarters or when primary weapons were unavailable. The cultural significance of the nifa extended beyond its practical uses. Gift knives often featured decorated handles or sheaths, and the quality of a person's everyday knife reflected their status and wealth. Far from being mere tools, these small blades held significant cultural importance and served as silent reminders that every Viking, warrior or not, had the means for violence close at hand. Viking shields themselves served as weapons, with the metal shield boss, the central metal dome, designed for offensive as well as defensive purposes. While the wooden shield with its iron reinforcement could block incoming strikes, the pronounced metal boss protruding from the center could be used to deliver stunning blows to an opponent's face or body. Archaeological findings show that many Viking shield bosses were not simply hemispherical, but featured a pronounced spike or point at the apex. This design transition wasn't decorative, it created a focused striking surface that could deliver tremendous force to a very small area, potentially puncturing armor or causing significant blunt trauma even through protective gear. The technique of shield striking appears repeatedly in Norse sagas, where warriors are described using their shields as offensive weapons in close combat. The shield boss strike was particularly effective when fighting in tight formations, where drawing back a weapon for a full swing might be impossible. A quick forward thrust with the shield could stun an opponent long enough to follow with a blade strike. This technique gained its brutal edge through the element of surprise. An opponent focused on avoiding a Viking's weapon might not anticipate the shield itself becoming a deadly implement. The Dane axe represents perhaps the most iconic Viking weapon that actually saw widespread historical use. Unlike the one-handed axes used with shields, the Dane axe was a two-handed weapon, featuring a broad, thin blade mounted on a shaft, typically ranging from 3 to 5 feet in length. This weapon gained prominence particularly in the later Viking Age and remained in use by their descendants in the Anglo-Scandinavian military traditions. Despite its impressive size, the Dane axe combined reach, cutting power, and surprising lightness to devastating effect. The thin blade and carefully balanced design made it remarkably maneuverable in skilled hands. With its long handle providing tremendous leverage, warriors could deliver powerful cuts capable of shearing through mail armor or severing limbs with a single stroke. Archaeological evidence shows these axes were often more carefully crafted than their utilitarian appearance might suggest. The blades were typically pattern welded with a harder steel edge, welded to a more flexible iron body, the same technique used in the finest swords. This sophisticated construction allowed the axe to maintain a razor edge while absorbing the shock of heavy strikes without shattering. The simple hand axe represents the most democratic weapon in the Viking arsenal, an everyday tool found in virtually every household that doubled as an effective weapon when needed. Unlike specialized military axes, these were working tools designed primarily for woodcutting, construction, and shipbuilding. What made these ordinary axes effective weapons was their ubiquity and the familiarity their owners had with them. A Viking who spent hours each week using an axe for daily tasks developed the strength, coordination, and intuitive understanding needed to wield it effectively in combat. While lacking the specialized features of dedicated war axes, the typical hand axe still concentrated significant weight behind a relatively narrow cutting edge. Archaeological findings show these everyday axes were typically 12 to 16 inches in total length, with a modestly sized head weighing about 1 to 2 pounds. The blade shape varied based on primary function, with some featuring a broader edge for woodworking, while others had a more pointed profile better suited to splitting logs, and coincidentally, more effective for penetrating armor. The historical impact of these humble weapons shouldn't be underestimated. The first Viking raids on England and Francia were likely carried out by men armed primarily with their everyday tools rather than specialized military equipment. What makes these weapons particularly fascinating is how they blur the line between tool and weapon. In a society where every free person was expected to defend their community when called upon, the distinction between everyday implement and instrument of war was often non-existent. The same axe that built a longship might later be used to raid a coastal monastery. The knife that carved a child's toy might end an enemy's life in a shield wall clash. Yet, weapons are just a part of the Vikings' survival story. While their brutal arsenal earned them a fearsome reputation on the battlefield, the Norse people developed equally impressive strategies for thriving in harsh environments. The same pragmatic approach that shaped their weapons influenced their daily survival techniques. Curious about how these seafaring warriors endured the brutal northern winters and treacherous voyages? Click on our next video, where you'll learn how these ingenious methods could save your life, even today.